moving swiftly on, we have got, see, I'm not going to get it wrong, Matt, because it's written. It's written there. I do apologise, everybody. Matt, who I'm going to bring up from Royal Mail, I keep saying the post office. And this hurts him greatly. And he's done so much for us, so I want to bring him up. Please welcome Matt from Royal Mail. And of course, if anybody collected the stamps that we unveiled last year, you will know that they were brought to life by two of our, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say there was 3 people involved in it, and we've got 2 of them here. It's the colourist, Mr. John Paul Beauvais, and the inker, Mr. Stephen Baskerville. Give them a round of applause. Yay! Hello, gentlemen. You can sit over there. Oh, are you modelling? Yes, it really is. Right. So let's talk a little bit about this. Who was here last year when we did the announcement? Yeah, I know you. Yeah. So a little bit of background to this whole thing, because last year we spent a whole load of time basically showing them off, and I believe the catchphrase from the day was "Wait, there's more." So Matt kindly reached out to us a few months before the convention and said, "I work for Royal Mail, and I just also happen to be a Transformers fan," which basically means that we have infiltrated all ranks of government and are ready to launch the great takeover.
Starts now.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll let you take the rest of the story. You basically pitched this idea of unveiling these stamps.
Yeah, so it was a good two and a half years ago now, I think, when we first, 3 maybe, that we first started looking at this. And the first thing that we did when we went into Hasbro was we wanted to hark back to the original comics, perhaps the original cartoons, give the fans and the sort of person who would come to TF Nation, you know, what they really want. And what we always try and do with the special stamp program is not just get people to go, "Oh my God, amazing, they're doing Transformers," but they're doing Transformers and look what they've done with it, they understand it. So we wanted to get the right people in, and right from the off, our pitch was we wanted, you know, JP and Stephen and Andrew to design the stamps for us, because, you know, it was kind of the dream team that were continuing to work on, you know, on well, obviously you joined later, a little bit later in the day.
Only a bit later.
Only a youngster, like myself.
We're always the same.
I've aged very badly, that's the difference.
And Hasbro were really into that idea, and so that's where it all started. But these things take a long time to come together, and it's a challenge for us because we just don't use people's style guides. So, you know, when you work in licensing, you're given style guides and you have to stick to them, and we say, well, no, we're going to create miniature works of art from scratch each time, which is always a difficult thing to get people's heads around. So in our original pitch, we used Regeneration 1, we used Transformers 84, and we used, I think, is it issue 0 that you did all those different colour, I'm sure you'll probably talk about that later, different colour combinations in there and all that kind of stuff, and they really got it, so that was exciting. So we knew from the off that's what we were going to do. I haven't done any kind of build-up. There they are, because hopefully everybody received some postcards at the start of the convention.
Yes, did everybody get their postcards? Yeah. If you didn't get any postcards, just go ahead to the reg desk and say, "Can I have some postcards?" "I haven't got any," and they'll give you some postcards.
Or you could go onto the Royal Mail shop and you could buy them.
You could. You could.
If you want to.
If you wanted to. Which you should.
So this is where we ended up, and the brief was very much, and I think this was the brief for things like Regeneration 1 as well, wasn't it? Was how you remember it, not how it was, from a colouring perspective and that sort of thing. Is that
yeah, that was, so when I did Regeneration 1, Andrew Wildman's instruction was that, and that stuck with me, was how you think it looked like in your head, not necessarily exactly how it looked at the time. So that was sort of the general mission was modern but not modern. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the first thing that we would do before we brief Andrew and to look at the composition. How's this going to work? How many stamps should we have? Because we can do any number, and it's not so much a commercial decision, it's more of an editorial decision. So you start with characters, and actually this sort of writes itself, because you're going to have Optimus Prime and Megatron, you're going to have Bumblebee, you're going to have Starscream, you're going to have Roadblock, and then you sort of build up from there. And if it's a comic thing, you're probably going to have Shockwave. You want the female character, so you're going to have RC. So as soon as you start adding more, then you start asking questions. Well, why haven't I included this one? Because I was determined to have Wheeljack.
Yeah,
I was
there
too. We both were. We're both big Wheeljack fanboys. Not afraid to admit it. And we failed in that, but but never mind. He did appear on one of the products actually. So the first thing that we would then do, once we've decided how many stamps there's going to be, is how is the composition going to work? It's really hard designing at this scale. Perhaps not if you're a comic book artist. So we've had real success with getting comic book artists to do this sort of thing. So John Higgins of Watchmen fame, he did a great Fire of London stamp issue for us and did it like a comic strip about 3 years ago now. We've done Marvel Comics with Alan Davis and DC Comics with Jim Chung, and now with Andrew and these guys here. What you find is that people who are used to drawing things within a box at a certain size can understand composition and understand what works at that size. I mean, we have some people on my team that have to continuously talk to some of the biggest design names in the world, and I can't name them, and say, no, that's not good enough, because people can't necessarily do it. It's an acquired skill to be able to draw it at this kind of size. So the first look of composition that we tried to do, now I would preface this with, this is just things that we've pulled off the internet. It's not meant to look like the classic comics. This is just about composition. So we would look at, well, these are kind of static poses. I would love to know what that is on the bottom left there, which says RC, appears to be Ultra Magnus with Ratchet's head. I don't know, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah,
do you know what that is?
No clue whatsoever. No idea.
And that's interesting looking Shockwave there as well. Yeah.
The Wikipedia will be going.
Well, everyone's called Blitzwing these days. Thank you.
So that means that at this point then you already knew which characters you
We
wanted.
knew which characters, that they just randomly got some characters. Jackson, I think, would have made the cut for one of the stamps. But so yes, at this point, the guys looking at this didn't know what characters we were going to use.
I really appreciate the fact that whoever put this together was like, I know what an Optimus Prime is, I know what a Megatron is, I know what a Bumblebee, and then after that, no.
And
no
Osprey probably looks just like Optimus Prime.
right.
Yeah, so no, I don't quite know what happened.
Except for the fact that I would just like to point out Optimus Prime, Megatron, Bumblebee, Starscream, yeah, G-Axis.
Well, indeed. I don't know who did that or where that came from.
Oh.
But there we are. This wasn't really working for us, so we moved on to a sort of a more action pose. Megatron seems to have become Galvatron in this one, you'll see.
As
interesting. This was starting to work, but I don't know if anyone has seen what we did with DC Comics or Marvel Comics, but it looked very like this. So we thought, well, let's try a different size of stamp, and we pulled it out, and this was starting to work better, and this was the point at which we thought, actually, these all work well in pairs, well, apart from RC and Soundwave, which there's some editorial license taken there, I think, but the rest of them all kind of fit together, and that's when we realised that. So actually, let's have them as pairs, and this is where we ended up with the stamps. Relatively straightforward with the stamps themselves. The mini sheet is more interesting actually. We'll come on to that in a moment, and there it is, the mini sheet, which is a bit more of a cartoon feel. And it was never in the brief, I don't think, to give it a more cartoony feel, was it?
Well, in the beginning, the design team that was kind of like putting it together said, in fairness, they said, what do you think? And I said, well, because I said, do you want it like the comics? Do you want it like the cartoon? How, kind of why do you?
Yeah.
And so what we decided was, I did some mock-ups. I sort of said, well, this is what the old school comics are like with the zip toe dots and everything. And if we're doing that for that, I think perhaps something more animated, a bit more modern for the Dinobots as one piece. So the idea was that they'd look slightly different to each other in two different styles.
And Swoop is blue. Do we want to talk about that again?
Yeah, so everybody knows Swoop is blue, right?
Same colour as Rumble.
Yeah, exactly. So you have the two, and when you showed me this, the first, honestly, so this is, we've signed the NDAs and all of that.
You were pushing it at that.
I couldn't, yeah. And he's like, oh, look at that. I'm like, yeah, but Swoop's red in the Marvel comics. And
that conversation went on.
And I get the feeling that nobody had actually, because I don't know how many Transformers fans work in Royal Mail.
No. But we specifically had this conversation. I said, look, Swoop is red in one continuity, blue in the other. We need to make a decision as to which one you want.
Yeah.
So, because there was a few things like that where I went, well, depending on which continuity we're talking about, they might look like this or this. Because even with like Soundwave, I was like, well, he sort of appeared as this kind of lilac-y magenta colour in the comics.
With a face.
Yes, but most people would think of him, I would think, I say that as a huge comic book fan, most people would kind of imagine he's blue. So there were discussions that were had, like, how many people would get confused by a pink Soundwave, excuse me. So there were discussions that were had, and I think we decided they were each in their own separate continuities, so it was all good.
I kind of like that this has a bit of a cartoon feel to it as well, isn't it? So we'll come back onto that. Now look at that. What have we got here? What's that about? So we when we got onto the mini sheet, we thought, well, what else can we use? What else is going to be cool? What else is going to call back to the early to mid 80s? So we thought, well, the box art would work really well as a stamp. But so would the original toys, or as we've got here, the more recent Masterpiece toys. We soon realised that was never going to work and was just going to be no end of helpful. Anyone might has to guess as to why that might be.
Toy photography often winds up being inaccurate.
Well, yeah, there is that, but there's also the fact that they transform into actual things. Actual things. There you go, there's the actual wheelchair JP, that's very exciting. So the licensing involved in having to get, a license from all the various different things that these guys transformed into was just not going to work. So we sort of got rid of that idea, but then in the products we brought the box art in and we tried to bring that kind of early to mid 80s feel to some of the products, which I think worked quite nicely actually. What's next? We could have done that.
It all comes back to wheelchair.
It does.
The next 30 minutes is just us talking about wheelchair, just so you know.
Yeah, well.
Stephen, do you want to go get a beer?
I think I will actually. Losing the will to live here. Move along.
So we thought about using the cartoon, but then we had a better idea for the cartoon, and if you download the Raw Mail app and show your phone, if anyone hasn't seen this, there are clips within. So we unveiled that last year too.
And that was the first time you ever did anything,
First time,
wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it just seemed like a nice way to bring it in. And if you want to give that a go with the postcards, that will work on the postcards that you've got, so just download the app and give it a shine and it will do all of that. We also tried to do a tech spec kind of idea. There's 3 random images on this one from different continuities, and this is a very early version of what we were looking at doing. I think this would have ended up looking more like box art tech specs. But the stamps themselves weren't quite working enough, but what we did do is put some hidden stuff into the main stamp. So again, if you shine a UV torch onto the stamps, their names appear in the trading alphabet, and there's some hidden faction symbols in there, and all those different kinds of things. And we thought about the wreckers, which I think I'd love to have done. I would love to have done this. Was never designed like this. This was taken from the internet and turned into what would work as a mini sheet. But ultimately, it's a little too niche, I think. You know, I think it would go down well with this audience, it would go down well with people like me. But if you didn't read the IDW comics or you didn't read the original UK comics, you probably don't know who the Rectors are. So that's why we sort of ended up finally with the Dinobots, and got to design a logo for the Dinobots as well, which is very exciting, which has never been done before, so that's pretty cool. And really that's probably enough from me. I would have handed it over to Andrew at this point. But we have some of Andrew's very early sketches there, which is kind of where all these designs started. But I probably quite interested now to hand over to Stephen, and there's some large images of some of the aliens.
One thing I was just going to say with this, so being the, let's call myself the resident nerd on the art team, the one that grew up with it, the question that came up was, where will they be? So I kind of got to say, well, I think obviously we wanted locations that were different for each stamp, both in colour and stuff. So I was like, well, we've got Autobot City, we've got, so when it was like Grimlock and Shockwave, was like, well, we can do a jungle, because you've kind of got the, you know, the prehistoric origin conflict thing there. So we've got Unicron, and the fourth one.
The Ark.
The Ark, of course, there you go, yeah, so it's kind of deserty Ark. And then, of course, we had a kind of primordial background for the Dinobots, so it's kind of like to keep them all visually different to one another. So I'm pleased I got to kind of, because it was like, they were like saying to Andrew and Stephen, oh, where should they be? I know.
That's why JP is very useful. We can just defer to JP on all these things.
So, Stephen, you weren't here last year.
Was that? I don't remember now. It's over a long time ago now.
Well, either that, it's either your memory or my memory's playing up. So
I was very quiet last year.
Yeah. So I'm just curious on what your thoughts were when you first heard about the project.
I was quite amazed, really. But to be honest, I got an email from purporting to be. I didn't know who it was or what it was going to be for. It's one of these mysterious emails, and I was just like, I thought, is this some kind of scam? So I actually contacted Andrew, and he said, no, it's for real, it's safe, you can reply to it, because you just don't know these days. And then gradually it sort of became clear that even though it wasn't actually, we weren't told what it was, it became clear, well, it is going to be stamped, and it's just like, wow, this is quite incredible. And then we had a Zoom meeting, because we were in those wonderful days of COVID. And it was, I think it was at that point that it started to become real. And then, so there's a lot of discussion at that point about how we were going to go about doing them. And so one of the things that was decided was we want to keep the characters and the backgrounds separate, so that obviously they can move stuff around. You've got like the Queen's head to put in and all stuff like that. So it meant that basically that's why we end up with like the rest. I mean, I've actually got some of the original artwork that I did here. So you can see, like, I had to draw like the characters on one sheet, and then the backgrounds like on a separate sheet, which is the kind of thing that, if you're working digitally, it's nice and easy to do in Photoshop and things, but it's a bit more complicated when you're doing it on paper. But it just means that you end up with you end up actually concentrating more on the backgrounds than you probably would have done otherwise. So they look nice, don't they? I must admit, looking at that size as well. I wish the stamps had been that big, to be honest, but...
Make the trip to the post office very because the other thing as well is, like, with this, I think it was because I'd done some packaging art for Hasbro a few years ago, and it was an intermediary, it was like a company in between, and the problem is if you don't do it in layers, I've had times where they've gone, oh yeah, can we just get rid of Laserbeak and like put him here instead? And I'm like, but it's not a real thing, I can't move, there's nothing behind that. There's just a big white void. Oh right, yeah, but can you? Well, no, you need to get it redrawn. It's not a 3D object that can be changed. So I thought let's just keep our options open for this one, which was really helpful, particularly when we get to the Dinobots, because that changed a lot.
And Stephen, just one more thing before we move on, because I think a lot of people don't truly understand the role that an Inca plays in...
Oh no,
in
not the Inca question.
Yeah, well, I just...
No, honestly, you know, I am always tempted to say, well no, actually we do just trace, that's all we do. But I mean, the thing is, like I've worked with Andrew for so many years that Andrew tends, when he pencils things for me to ink, he just tends to leave quite a lot of leeway for me to do stuff to it. So it means that you can add like lighting effects and sort of metallic things and bashed upness and stuff like that, and just generally like you just sort of play on the sort of the graphical side of things, more of a sort of an illustrative sort of vibe to it. Whereas like what Andrew is doing is basically he's drawing like the basic structure and the anatomy, even anatomy for Transformers. I guess it's anatomy of the soul, and so it is an impossible to define step. I mean, actually one side thing just about inking is it's one of those strange things that we actually do still use inkers at all, because obviously it was only ever done originally was because printing techniques couldn't actually reproduce pencil in the early days, so that's why it's almost like it comes from like engraving techniques and things really. It's just a means to be able to produce a printed black and white plate that you could then add the colour plates to produce colour artwork. So I mean this is going back in the early part of the 20th century, but obviously in recent years there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to use an inker. You can always work from the pencils, but the style that's sort of grown up as like a comic book look does involve that ink stage, so that's why it's still there. But it is an anachronism, and it amazes me that it still keeps going really. But long may it continue.
So if we now move on to some of the numerous colour options that you did, JP.
Yeah, so I'm having to look at this again because there were quite a lot of versions of things. I'm trying to remember. Are they in any kind of sequential order? No, okay. So I think, I'm going to stand up, I think we started with this one. I'm pretty sure we started with this one. So the characters were more or less set early on colour style wise. It was the backgrounds that tend to be fiddled with the most. I think I said last time there's a joke about when you design anything that you end up with file numbers. So I had kind of like Starscream Bumblebee 1, Starscream Bumblebee 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7A, 7B, and then 8 final. Then 8 final revised. And then 8 final revision 1 brackets A. It was bonkers. So I kept thinking they're done, they kept pulling me back in. So I'm trying to look at the differences. So one thing that was added, so initially it was kind of like a fairly plain scene of the Ark crashed, and then they decided they wanted a little more kind of life to it, so you ended up going from like having the smoke coming out of Starscream's gun there, the fire in the background, there's fire and smoke coming out from the Ark, these wisps that came in, and yeah, in fact, so there we are. So that's like, I think that's pretty much the beginning, and then I think the final, between those two. So there was a lot of changing of the background colours to make sure that that things popped or stood out. There were challenges because the Queen's profile was to be white, so if there was anything too white in the background, that had to be altered. I'm pretty sure, I might have had to extinguish the sun in one of these.
I think you did, yes.
I think it became a thing of I need to make the sun darker, which is a fine sentence, but quite a hard thing to deliver. But yes, I'm not sure, or did I add it in? Anyway, the sun rose and the sun set a few times on these as they changed. But yeah, it was there was a lot of, it seems really simple, but there was a tremendous amount of experimentation. And you can see, if you see the zoomed in ones, you've got all the lovely Ben-Day dots, the old school kind of dot patterns on the foreground character. So I sort of, the reason it was Regen 1E, or the like you remember it but not, was the backgrounds actually was slightly more modern in the way they were done and coloured, but it helped make the bold characters pop in the foreground, which, again, I was colouring it about this size, knowing it was going to be about this big, so I was trying to look at it from 2 points of view, and of course you did lovely big prints of things as well, so it did mean that some of that detail got seen.
Yes.
Yeah, this one changed a lot as well. I forget which one came first and last.
I think the pink was first, was it?
I think so, yeah, because I thought the pink was I was trying to get all the backgrounds to contrast more. This one I think was the least changed of all of them. Yeah, see, this is the thing, but my 15 versions on there, I'm trying to see the differences between them. But yeah, the background changed. I think there was some discussion about the axe and what angle it was going to be pointed at, whether it could be, how much of a weapon it could be. But yeah, if you want to skip on. So the ones that got changed a lot was the Dinobots. So that's definitely the starting one.
Yeah.
And Stephen was far too self-deprecating to really say what the ink had brought to it. So it's like he said, Andrew would draw the kind of effectively the outlines and shapes of it, but these sort of like gleams and things here were actually inked. We had two different versions of that artwork, and I incorporated them both. So there's elements of like a much more inky style and an animated style. So we started with this, and I think the initial switch, and I'm looking at them all, the sky changed a couple of times. I tried to make it hellish, and once we got to this kind of hellish, it just helped pop all the characters from the foreground. There was a debate as to whether swoop was blue or red. I may have coloured both, I can't remember now. That might have been Dinobot 1A, I'm not sure. And part of it was about composition, so the design team sort of decided that what they wanted was something to frame it in the foreground. So we ended up having these kind of tree branches and a random lizard there. And things like, I wanted to really sell the weight of Grimlock, so when he's stomping, so extra rocks were kind of drawn, and I tried to make it blurry, so it looks like there's some motion happening there. And then, of course, every thread that you pull to change something is like a butterfly effect. So we swapped the background round, so that was done separately, so it flipped, so the volcano was now over here. What it meant, this was one of those, the Queen's Head. Because when it went like this, there was fire here and fire here, so it got flipped, so you had fire to balance out both sides. But yeah, I can't remember if it was lightning or lava again, the Queen's Head didn't stand out very much, so I had to make the lava darker. Again,
On the volcano.
I know, it's sort of like things that you think, okay, well I'll find a way to make that happen. But yeah, so this one changed a lot, and I said this before, that the Photoshop, which is what I did my colouring in, the file size was so big that it couldn't save it as a Photoshop file anymore. And there's actually a file type I didn't know, which is called Photoshop Big, and that's how it had to save it. So it's the biggest, because that was being coloured about that size, and each and every Dinobot had been coloured separately, just in case they needed changes. The whole background had been copied separately in case it needed changes. And this one definitely had a version 9 final revised A at the end. But I'm really happy with how it came out, but it was a challenge.
Should just give a little shout out to this, I think, Dave, don't you?
Wow!
So you don't get to see these in big size unless you come to TF Nation, it seems, because we've, a couple of years now, brought things along to raise money for charity, and this was a one-off floating museum quality glycine print, limited edition, one of one, so it's the only one in the world that we auctioned off yesterday for a mighty £1,700. Yeah, for Mary's Meals, which is absolutely fantastic, and I believe it's in the room somewhere. I can't see, but out there. It might be in the room, I'm not sure. Maybe it's gone.
Probably ran home. Yeah.
So that was auctioned off yesterday, and last year we had these as well, which I think Toy Food still have these now. I don't know whether they're selling them at the moment or not, but
they're probably quite busy.
Every
time I've gone into that deal,
there are some left, and we can probably get those out at some point in the future. And these were an exclusive that we produced for TF Nation last year, 500 of them, all numbered. The reason that they've got the uncoloured Dinobots is because the stamps aren't actually on there because we hadn't issued the stamps at that point. We launched the stamps here.
Yes.
So this was the first place in the world that this time last year that anybody had seen the stamps. And so we were sort of doing that, but I quite like it without the stamps on there because it sort of shows some sort of progression.
It's a bit like the old sticker books. You could buy
Exactly,
link them
Well, that was it. We actually had a conversation about that, didn't we?
Yeah.
It was and I think Andrew Turnbull had said that exact thing, because if it's old and part of his childhood, Andrew Turnbull will attempt to find a way to bring it back. And he was definitely one for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
You know.
I hope no one's going to use that as a colouring book, but really it does disturb me that they could spoil the whole thing by getting the crayons out. Really.
Well, actually, just to
Maybe
say,
I could bring it to you and you could colour it in for them.
yeah.
Using version 62.
Yeah. 62A revised final B. I was just going to say as well, so just to point out, so in terms of inks, so this is the light version of the inks. So you can see, if you look at the light version of how this was inked, as opposed to the final one, you can see just how much Stephen did bring to it in terms of he went full basketball on the stamps. These are only part way.
And what we haven't mentioned, and we talked about it last year, was that these were all personally signed off by Her Majesty the Queen as well. One of the last designs that she would have signed off, actually. Not the final ones, but yes, so everything that we do is signed off by the monarch. So yes, Her Majesty will have been sitting there and approving an Optimus Prime stamp. Which,
I think someone pointed out that the last ones that she approved that were currently on sale at the time of her death.
what's that, sorry?
I think somebody points out they're probably the last ones that she approved, probably the last ones that were on sale before
Yes.
she died that she approved.
It's somebody speculated that, but they weren't actually, unfortunately. I have to be able to say they were.
I suppose the man on the inside would probably know.
But no, I mean, and it was great because we were here doing this last year and announcing them. And it was one of the volunteers on the door knew somebody at the BBC who was a Transformers fan and sent him to him. He was looking at this picture of the panel, and then a BBC News journalist happened to be looking over his shoulder. Next thing you know, BBC News had picked up on it. And we're sitting in the bar afterwards, and it's ping, 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 and it was just getting all this momentum.
Yeah.
Just from watching right here. So
That's what you do. You see.
So quote me on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, it really was. So thank you.
And I think it was, it was one of those unique things that I think would not only happen as part of a Transformers convention, but also it's so representative of the UK fan base, the fact that it ties in to that Marvel comic. And as you say, with the Dinobots, you bring in that more Sunbow style, that cartoon, but I think it was absolutely the right choice.
It was a love letter to Holly.
Yeah,
it was. Yeah.
Which, if you had done a set of modern day Transformers stamps, it would have been a set of Transformers stamps.
Yeah.
But I think it just had that je ne sais quoi quality, shall we say. Yeah, you see, I can regurgitate words that I've heard on TV.
We.
Anything else you want to add?
I don't think there's anything else. No, that's it.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of questions then, if you don't don't mind. So Stephen, I know that you mentioned that you were a little confused at the beginning. It's interesting that you were trying to reach out via email, by the way.
That's very
Just pointing that out, just saying. But what was the collaborative process between you and Andrew then at the beginning, and how you approached it as a working pair?
I think it was basically pretty much the way that we pretty much always worked, which is basically Andrew does this thing and then he passes it on to me, and then I sort of pick up the baton, I guess, as to say. Yeah, no, we've never really done a lot of back and forth about things. I think Andrew, I mean, obviously, you know, his role was absolutely central. I mean, you know, there's nothing. I mean, I'm not just saying this because he's not here, but he really, you know, without him, the stamps wouldn't look anything like that. You know, despite our work on them, and we, you know, we'd have done what we do, but it's definitely all comes from Andrew. Does the overall look. But then, yeah, so we've always been, he's always been quite happy when he's done the pencil stage. I've never really had any sort of negative feedback or lots of changes from Andrew when he gets to the ink stage. He's always been quite happy. I think he tends to, because I've always said about Andrew's pencils is that when I look at them, I can see them inked already, and literally, it's a bit mystical, but literally I know what I have to put down there on top of his pencils, and it does feel quite mystical, really. And he always seems happy with what I do with them. So yeah, there's no real back and forth. We're so used to working, you know, well not really together, because basically Andrew does his thing and then I do my thing and then JP does his thing, and you know, we all understand how difficult it is to be doing those different roles, and we understand that it won't look like, you know, I wouldn't colour it like JP colours it, Andrew wouldn't ink it the way I inked it, you know. We understand the difficulties that everybody has with that step of the process, and respect each other for what we do, I think, and just get by, and, you know, I was really pleased that it all turned out, so it's brilliant.
And I think it's, I mean, having worked on Regen for how many issues we did with the three of us, you know, I know what suits, you know, Stephen's inks. Like, you have to use different colouring styles for different artists, for different styles, and that's why I knew it was going to end up being somewhat either Regen or original comic, because if you overcomplicate it, you ruin the line work. So it's very much trying to bring out, you know, to be more than the sum of its parts, and not like go, well, I've ruined everybody else's work.
That's one of the things I've always liked about working with JP, is that he understands that there is an inked layer within the whole process, and a lot of, in fact, to be honest, most modern comics, you tend to look and you have to squint very, very hard to actually see the inks within the finished product, and he managed to get that balance of having the depth and the texture and all the effects and things that the colour brings, the digital colour can bring, that really is really difficult to do by hand colouring. So that, you know, he really uses the most up-to-date techniques, but he still manages to keep the actual base line art in there as well, which is quite a trick to do. So thanks, JP.
That's what you get for growing up on this stuff, JP.
Growing up?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I do apologise. So, Matt, what's next for Royal Mint? What have you got on the pipeline, or what's been...
When are the Wheeljack stamps coming?
Yeah.
I don't think the Wheeljack stamps are ever coming, actually, unfortunately. Well, next up, actually, we've got Terry Pratchett, who's announced those in the last week or so, so we've got some Discworld stamps on the way, which is, you know, quite cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, can we talk a little bit about the UK rule, which is that there's got to be a...
Oh yeah, no, probably not, but I will.
Alright, go on.
so theoretically, well, not just theoretically, for something to be on a UK stamp, it is supposed to be a British passion, but ultimately it's supposed to have Britishness in its DNA. And over time we have moved further towards towards properties which you would probably say are, well, they're not necessarily British properties, but that there's been reasons why we felt we could do them. And that we did it with Star Wars in 2015, I think. Yeah, 2015. And the reason for that, or the reason given for that, was the contribution that Star Wars had made to the UK film industry, and all of the editorial
shot, Pinewood,
all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a story that made sense. We also did Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones was filmed in Northern Ireland and made in Northern Ireland, so that was our reasoning for that. Harry Potter, the movies, the books are British, you know, so there's obvious British elements there. But it's moved over time, and probably the big one or two. One was Marvel Comics. When we did the Marvel Comics establishment, you might say to yourself, well, why can you do Marvel Comics? Well, it was the UK contribution to comic books, which was as much DC as Marvel, but you know, that's what we were doing at the time, and we got Alan Davis to design those stamps, who many of you will know as a well-known British comic book artist. But really, everything has come full circle, because the reason that we knew we could do Marvel Comics was because of what I knew about Marvel UK, because of what I knew about Transformers. So Marvel allowed us to do Transformers. I would say that Marvel had nothing to do with that anymore, but you know, we felt we were able to do Transformers on the back of the fact that we'd done some of these other things. But the fact that we were able to do those things came from that knowledge of, you know, the contribution of Marvel UK and the artists who'd gone to America and changed comics and all those kind of things. So from there we did DC, and DC we used a British artist called Jim Chung, and Star Trek we did, around the time that Picard was coming back, and Picard he's by far the most popular captain apparently. So as a Shatner fan, I can't quite understand that, but there you go.
Captain Sisko.
You know, okay, well, we all have our choices, don't we? So that has changed it, but we wouldn't have, but like you say, we wouldn't have just put Rise of the Beast on a stamp, even if we thought that was going to sell lots of stamps, because there's not an editorial reason for it. So it was really important to us that we really, and we beefed that up more in Transformers than we did probably in Marvel and some of the other things that we've done, just because it worked so well as a concept, because there is such a British thread to the history of Transformers, and I think it's probably safe to say that, you know, Transformers would not have the following it does amongst people of a certain age, were it not.
I don't even.
I include myself in that.
Yeah, I don't even think it's necessarily a certain age, though, is it? I mean,
maybe not.
What's filtered down from the work that Simon, Andrew, Stephen did, you know, a few years ago, has really stood the test of time.
You wouldn't have had the IDW stuff in the form that it was. You probably wouldn't have had that at all, which you wouldn't have Void Rivals and any of those things. Yeah. If it wasn't for the UK. So it's a story that absolutely stands up, and you know, people understood it. But like I say, actually, it was Transformers that sort of enabled me to pitch to Royal Mail that we could do that sort of thing anyway, from the fact that we'd done Marvel and the reason that we'd done Marvel.
So what you're saying is that Transformers has transformed the way Royal Mail operates.
That's the one.
And we're going to end it on that.